Liam Hart had accepted his mute daughter might never speak, until a stranger in a cafe made her laugh without a sound. A glance, one shared language, and his guarded world shifted. But who was this woman, and why did her past feel like the key to their future? Before we dive into this unforgettable journey, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? If stories about love, sacrifice, and second chances speak to your heart, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow, we're bringing you another powerful story you won't want to miss. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as Liam Hart pushed it open, one hand steadying the small figure beside him. Outside, the late autumn wind whipped through the streets, tossing dry leaves into swirls. But inside the little corner cafe, the air was warm, carrying the faint scent of cinnamon and freshly brewed coffee. Aria clung to her father's hand as they stepped inside, her small fingers cold despite her mittens. At 7 years old, she was as delicate as spun glass, slender frame, pale skin, and a gaze that often seemed fixed somewhere far away. The world rarely drew her out, strangers even less so. Liam scanned the cafe, his eyes instinctively seeking the quietest corner. His life as a tech millionaire had made him used to commanding spaces, but here he wanted invisibility. No curious stares, no forced conversations. Just coffee for him, warm cocoa for Aria, and the comforting silence they both understood. His way, he murmured, guiding her toward a small table by the window. She slid into the chair without a word, pulling a small notepad and a box of crayons from her backpack. The notepad was her voice, filled with sketches that spoke where sound could not. Liam gave her a faint smile. "I'll get our drinks. Stay here, okay?" Aria nodded, her hair falling into her eyes as she bent over the page, already sketching something only she could see. At the counter, Liam placed their order with his usual efficiency, his deep voice low but steady. The barista, a young man with a friendly smile, tried to make small talk, but Liam's polite nods kept it brief. His gaze flicked back to Aria every few seconds, a habit formed over years of protecting her from the unpredictable world. It was during one of those glances that he noticed a curious movement beside her table. A young woman had stopped near Aria's chair, crouching down to pick up something from the floor. She held up a bright blue crayon between her fingers, smiling warmly as she set it back on the table. Her hair was pulled into a loose braid that trailed over one shoulder, and her coat was dusted with a faint layer of rain from outside. Then, without hesitation, she signed 2 simple words. "It's okay." Liam's hand stilled over his wallet. Aria's head snapped up. For a heartbreak, her wide brown eyes searched the woman's face. Then, as if a hidden switch had been flipped, her expression lit up. Not the small, polite smile she sometimes offered, but something unguarded and bright. The woman sighed again, her fingers moving with an ease that spoke of familiarity, not formality. Aria responded, shy at first, her little hands shaping words Liam couldn't fully follow. He knew the basics of sign language, enough to communicate simple needs, but Aria's condition had made her hesitant to use it with anyone but him. Seeing her sign freely to a stranger was surreal. He took a slow step forward, his coffee forgotten. By the time he reached the table, Aria was laughing, a soundless laugh that crinkled her eyes and made her shoulders shake. Liam froze mid-step, unsure what to make of the sight. His daughter, who barely acknowledged strangers, was leaning forward, engaged in a silent exchange with someone she had met seconds ago. The young woman glanced up at him. Her smile didn't falter, but her hand stilled in mid-motion. "She dropped this," she said softly, nodding toward the crayon still in Aria's small fingers. "I just thought I'd say hello in a way she could understand." Her voice was warm, unhurried, the kind of tone that made you want to listen, even if you didn't plan to. Liam cleared his throat, the guarded edge slipping back into his voice. "You know sign language." "I work with kids at the community center down on Harper Street," she explained, rising to her feet. "Some of them are deaf, some nonverbal. It's not much, but it's enough to make them feel seen." Aria tugged at her sleeve, signing something Liam couldn't catch entirely. The woman crouched again, replying in fluid motions that drew another smile from the girl. For a moment, Liam just stood there, watching torn between gratitude and a strange discomfort. He wasn't used to strangers slipping past Aria's walls so easily. "Thank you," he said finally, his tone polite but clipped. Not many people know how to speak to her. "It's not hard to learn," the woman replied gently. "Most people just don't try." Something in her words settled into the air between them, quiet but undeniable. She gave Aria one last smile. "I should let you enjoy your afternoon." Before Liam could respond, she turned and walked toward the door, the bell above it chiming as she stepped into the cool gray light outside. Aria watched her go, her hand still half raised in an unfinished sign. Then she looked up at her father, her expression questioning, almost pleading. Liam exhaled slowly, a faint knot forming in his chest. He didn't even know the woman's name, but he couldn't ignore what he'd just seen. For the first time in years, someone had made his daughter light up in public, and it hadn't been him. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange haze for Liam. He and Aria sat in their corner, sipping their drinks, but his thoughts kept circling back to the young woman. She hadn't just spoken to Aria, she had connected with her, and she'd done it so effortlessly, as if she'd known her for years. Aria was different after she left. Her usual stillness was replaced by a restless energy. She kept glancing at the door, as if half expecting the woman to return. Every so often, she'd pick up a crayon and begin sketching shapes that looked suspiciously like hands, forming signs. Liam didn't interrupt. Instead, he sat back and studied her quietly, the protective part of him warring with something he didn't want to name. By the time they left the cafe, the late afternoon light had faded into a dusky glow. Liam adjusted Aria's scarf as they stepped into the brisk air, her small hand slipping into his. The city moved around them, cars passing, shopfront lights flickering on. But Liam's mind was elsewhere. He didn't believe in chance encounters. His life had been built on calculated moves, strategic risks, and clear goals. And yet, something about that moment in the cafe felt deliberate, as if the universe had nudged their paths together. That night, after Aria was tucked into bed, Liam lingered by her door, watching her sleep. Her crayon-streaked notepad was clutched loosely in her hands, open to a page covered in drawings of two stick figures, one small, one taller, both smiling, their hands lifted in mirrored gestures. The image stirred something in him. He turned away, heading for his study, but paused at the thought. Community Center on Harper Street. It wasn't far. The next morning, his routine felt different. Over breakfast, Aria kept tapping her notepad, showing him a simple sketch of the young woman from yesterday. Her eyes shone with unspoken hope. "You really liked her," he said quietly. Aria nodded, signing a small sequence he understood well enough. Nice, kind, felt good. He hesitated, torn between satisfying her curiosity and protecting her from disappointment. But the truth was, he wanted to know too. Later that day, he found himself driving past the Harper Street Community Center. The building was modest, faded brick, bright murals painted by children on the outer walls, but the parking lot was full. Through the glass doors, he could see kids of all ages bustling about, their voices mingling in an unfiltered, joyful chaos. He didn't go in, not yet. Instead, he sat in his car for several minutes, replaying the image of her crouched beside Aria's chair, her hands moving with gentle precision. The way she'd looked at his daughter, like she was seen. When he finally pulled away, he told himself it was just curiosity, just wanting to thank her properly. But deep down, Liam knew it was more than that. Some part of him, long dormant, had stirred when their eyes met across that cafe table. And it wasn't just because she'd reached Aria. It was because, for the briefest moment, she'd reached him too. The following morning, Liam Hart woke to the sound of rain tapping against the glass walls of his penthouse. The city skyline was blurred behind a misty veil, but his mind was already sharp, replaying the same image over and over. Aria's bright, unguarded smile in the cafe. That smile had been for a stranger. It wasn't jealousy he felt, not exactly. It was caution, a deep, gnawing caution that came from years of watching people drift in and out of his daughter's life, leaving pieces of her trust scattered behind them. Over breakfast, Aria sat across from him, swinging her legs under the chair, scribbling absent-mindedly in her notepad. Every so often, she glanced up, almost expectantly, as if waiting for him to say something. Finally, he asked, "Do you want to see her again?" Aria paused mid-crayon stroke, then nodded without hesitation. She signed one word, "Yes," and then followed it with another, slower, "Please." Her hands were small and deliberate, but the emotion in her eyes was impossible to miss. Liam set his coffee down, already knowing there was no way he could ignore this. He had the resources, the network, the means to find almost anyone, and yet the idea of searching for the young woman from the cafe felt oddly personal, almost intrusive. Still, later that morning, he called his assistant. "Clara," he said, his tone clipped, "I need you to find someone for me. A young woman, mid-20s, works with children. She knows sign language. She mentioned a community center on Harper Street." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Any idea of her name?" She hesitated. "Emma, that's all I have." Clara, efficient as always, didn't waste time with questions. "Give me a few hours." While she worked, Liam buried himself in meetings, but his focus kept slipping. Every spreadsheet, every presentation seemed to dissolve into flashes of that moment in the cafe. The easy way Emma had crouched to Aria's level, the warmth in her hands as she signed. By early afternoon, Clara called back. "Found her," she announced. "Emma Lane, 26, volunteers at a children's communication therapy group 3 days a week, teaches art on weekends. No formal teaching degree," she self-taught, "but the center's director says she's a favorite among the kids." Liam's grip tightened slightly on the phone. "Address?" "At the Harper Street Community Center most afternoons," Clara replied. "Should I set up a meeting?" He said after a moment, "I'll handle it." When he ended the call, he stared out the window for a long moment, rain streaking the glass. This wasn't business. This wasn't even charity. It was something he couldn't define, and that unsettled him more than he cared to admit. By 3 o'clock, he was pulling into the parking lot of the community center. The building stood out among the gray streets, its brick walls brightened by murals. Signs, colorful hands forming signs, children holding kites against a painted sky. He walked in under the pretense he'd already settled on a possible donation inquiry. The receptionist, a cheerful woman with short hair and kind eyes, greeted him warmly. "Can we help you today, Mr. Hart?" he said. "I'm interested in learning more about your programs. Considering supporting local initiatives?" Her eyes widened slightly. His last name had that effect. Within minutes, she was walking him through the main hall, pointing out classrooms and play areas. The sound of laughter, mixed with the occasional signed conversation, filled the space. And then he saw her. Emma was in one of the art rooms, a paintbrush in hand, surrounded by a semicircle of children. Some chattered to each other, others moved their hands in fluid signs. She was in the middle of explaining something, switching effortlessly between spoken words and sign language. What struck him most wasn't just her skill, it was the way she moved at each child's pace, adjusting her tone, her gestures, even her expressions, so each one felt understood. When a boy in the corner hesitated with his brush, she crouched beside him, whispered something, and sighed it too, her smile patient and steady until his face lit up and he joined in. Liam lingered near the doorway, unnoticed, his hands in his pockets. He'd expected professionalism. He hadn't expected this. Emma wasn't just teaching art. She was giving these children something deeper, a space where they didn't have to explain themselves, where they belonged without condition. When she finally noticed him, her gaze flickered with recognition. She excused herself from the group and walked over, wiping her hands on a paint-stained. "Mr. Hart," she said, her tone friendly but measured. "This is unexpected." "I was in the neighborhood," he replied smoothly, though he knew how hollow that sounded. "Thought I'd see what the center offers." Her eyebrow lifted slightly, but she didn't call him out on it. "Well, you found us. We're a little messy, a little loud, but we get the job done." "Consider that," he said, glancing at the children. "You're good with them." "It's what I do," she replied simply, "though I'm not used to rich men showing up in my world." The comment wasn't hostile, just honest, but it landed heavier than she likely intended. He let a faint smile tug at his mouth. "Maybe your world is worth showing up for." Her gaze held his for a moment, searching, then she nodded politely. "If you're interested in supporting the center, you should talk to our director. She can walk you through our needs." She didn't linger, didn't try to impress him, just returned to her group, picking up a brush and slipping back into the easy rhythm of teaching. Liam stayed a few minutes longer, watching her from the doorway before finally turning away. Back in his car, he sat for a long moment, drumming his fingers against the steering wheel. He'd come to confirm what he'd seen in the cafe, that her connection with Aria wasn't a fluke. He'd found his answer. Now came the harder question, whether to let her into his daughter's life, knowing the risk that came with it. That evening, Liam stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his home, the city lights glittering far below. Aria was curled up on the couch, flipping through a picture book, her notepad resting beside her. "Busy day?" Clara asked, stepping into the room with a folder in hand. He didn't turn. "Productive?" She set the folder on the coffee table. "That's the information you asked for on Emma Lane. Nothing invasive, just public records. Her volunteer work, background, that sort of thing." Liam glanced down at the neatly organized pages. It wasn't much, but it was enough to sketch the outline of her life. Small-town upbringing, a scholarship she'd turned down to care for a sick parent, jobs in art supply stores and after-school programs. Nothing in it suggested instability or unreliability. And yet, his chest tightened with that same protective instinct. Aria had been let down before, by family, by caretakers, even by well-meaning friends who hadn't understood what commitment to her meant. He walked over to the couch and sat beside his daughter. "How was school?" She signed a quick, "Okay," before turning the notepad toward him. A new drawing filled the page. Emma again, surrounded by children, her hands especially now that she's important to you," he said quietly. Aria nodded without hesitation. He leaned back, exhaling. "It's not that simple, sweetheart. People don't always stay." Her expression clouded, the joy from the cafe replaced by something more guarded. She didn't argue, she couldn't. Her small shoulders slumped as she turned back to her book. That night, sleep didn't come easily. He kept seeing the look in Aria's eyes when Emma signed to her, the way her face lit up. It was more than admiration, it was recognition. Someone speaking her language, literally and figuratively. By morning, Liam had made a decision, though he wouldn't admit it out loud yet. He called the community center's director, arranging a formal meeting under the guise of a philanthropic initiative. The conversation was cordial, professional, but his mind kept drifting to the art room, the laughter, the scent of paint and paper. When the meeting ended, the director walked him out, and there she was again, Emma, standing near the entrance, her coat on, ready to leave. She spotted him and hesitated. "Twice in 2 days," she said with a faint smile. "You must really like community centers." "Maybe I like the people in them," he replied. Her eyes narrowed slightly in curiosity, but she didn't press. "Well, good luck with your no-nation plans." He almost said something then, asked if she'd be willing to meet Aria again, but stopped himself. If he opened that door, there was no going back. As she walked past him, he realized his skepticism wasn't about her. It was about himself, his ability to let someone into their small, fragile world without bracing for the day they'd leave. When he got home, Aria was waiting by the window, her gaze flicking to him as soon as he stepped inside. She didn't say a word, but the question in her eyes was loud enough. Not yet, he thought, but maybe soon. For 3 days, Liam debated with himself, weighing the risk against the possibility. He wasn't a man who acted on impulse. His fortune had been built on calculated moves and meticulous planning. But every time he saw Aria at breakfast, sitting quietly with her sketchbook, he pictured her face lighting up in that cafe. On the 4th morning, the decision came almost without warning. As Clara walked in to go over his schedule, he interrupted her. Clear my afternoon, he said. Clara's brows lifted slightly. Something urgent? He replied. I need to make an invitation. Within an hour, he was outside the Harper Street Community Center again. This time, Emma was on a bench near the entrance, tying her hair back before heading inside. The winter light caught on strands of gold in her brown hair, and she looked up just as he approached. Mr. Hart, she said with a mild note of surprise. Third time's the charm. He didn't waste time with small talk. I'd like you to meet my daughter, properly. Emma's expression softened but stayed guarded. We've already met. Been here, he said. At my home. I'm offering you a short-term role, private tutoring in sign language and connection. Her brows drew together. That's a strange job description. He exhaled slowly, choosing his words. Aria doesn't have many peers. She's bright, creative, but she's isolated. You're the first person outside our small circle she's truly responded to. Emma tilted her head. And you want to see if it was more than a fluke. He didn't answer that directly, but his silence was enough. She looked away for a moment, watching a group of children rush inside. How short-term is a month, he said. No strings, no long-term obligations. I just want to give her the chance to know you in a setting where she's comfortable. Emma hesitated, and he could see the calculation in her eyes, responsibilities, boundaries, the unspoken rules she lived by. I don't work for wealthy families, she said finally. I've seen how it can go. Staff treated like they're part of the scenery until they're not needed anymore. I'm not asking you to be staff, he said evenly. I'm asking you to help my daughter. Something shifted in her gaze at that, but she still didn't commit. Let me think about it. By the next morning, her answer came via a short call. I'll try it, but only because of Aria. That Friday afternoon, the gates of the Hart estate swung open for Emma's small, weathered hatchback. She drove up the winding path lined with bare winter trees until the house came into view, a modern spread of steel and glass, softened by sprawling gardens now dormant in the cold. Liam met her at the front entrance, hands in his coat pockets. Aria was beside him, her hair in a neat braid, eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. Aria, Liam signed slowly. This is Emma. She's here to play some games with you. Aria's gaze flicked between them, then down to the colorful tote bag Emma carried. Hi, Aria, Emma said gently, signing the words as she spoke. I brought something fun. Inside, she unpacked a set of oversized cards, each one printed with a bright illustration and the corresponding sign in bold letters. She spread them out on a low table in the sunroom, where light streamed in through the glass walls. Aria hung back at first, twisting the hem of her sweater in her fingers. Emma didn't press. She simply picked up a card showing a smiling cat, signed the word slowly, then placed it in the center. Your turn, she said, holding up another card. Aria glanced at her father. Liam gave a small nod, and she stepped forward, hesitantly mimicking the sign for cat. Perfect, Emma said, smiling. She didn't correct or hover, just let Aria take the space she needed. The game moved slowly at first, but within 15 minutes, Aria was picking up cards on her own, occasionally glancing at her father as if checking whether this was still okay. Liam stood a few feet away, arms crossed, trying not to look like he was evaluating every micro-expression on Emma's face, but the truth was, he was. He noticed the way she matched Aria's pace, never rushing, never filling the silence uncessily. She didn't overpraise, each good or yes was genuine, earned. When Aria finally signed thank you without prompting at the end of the game, Emma's smile was small but warm, like she understood the magnitude of the moment. Aria slipped away to her room afterward, the sound of her soft footsteps fading upstairs. Liam walked Emma to the door. For a moment, neither spoke. You should know, he said at last, his voice low. My daughter has been hurt before. Not physically. Emotionally. People promise to be there, and then they leave. She doesn't forget that. Emma's eyes held his steadily. I understand, and I don't make promises I can't keep. He studied her for a beat longer, weighing the sincerity in her tone. Finally, he nodded. As she stepped outside, the winter air curling between them, she added, "I'm not afraid of quiet, Mr. Hart. Sometimes, the best conversations happen without words." In the next week, Emma returned twice more, each time bringing something new: a picture book told entirely in sign, a set of finger puppets for silent storytelling. Liam watched each session from a careful distance, resisting the urge to hover too close. With each visit, Aria's hesitancy softened. She began greeting Emma with a small wave instead of silence. She lingered after lessons instead of darting upstairs. Still, Liam's guard remained firmly in place. He'd seen too many people win Aria over, only to vanish when the novelty wore off. He wasn't sure if Emma understood the weight of becoming important to his daughter. One afternoon, after a particularly spirited puppet story, Aria signed something to Emma that Liam didn't catch. Emma glanced at him before replying, "That's up to your dad, not me." When he asked later, she explained, "She wants to know if I can come more often." It was a simple question, but it hit him harder than expected. More often meant more investment, more risk of loss. He didn't answer right away. "Let's see how this month goes," he said finally. That night, he found Aria asleep with the signing cards spread across her bed, her fingers curled around the one for friend. The sight unsettled him, in a good way and a dangerous way all at once. By the end of the agreed month, Emma had become a quiet fixture in their home, though never overstepping. She never stayed longer than planned, never lingered in rooms she wasn't invited into, never treated the estate as anything other than a workplace. But it wasn't just a workplace anymore. Liam could see it in Aria's eyes every time the doorbell rang during Emma's scheduled visits. One evening, as Emma was leaving, Liam stopped her at the door. "I don't know how long you plan to keep doing this," he said carefully, "but I want you to understand, if you choose to walk away, it won't just be me you're walking away from." Emma didn't flinch. "Then I'll only walk towards something worth staying for." It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was enough to loosen the ice between them, just a fraction. By the third week, Emma's presence had shifted the rhythm of the Hart estate in ways Liam hadn't predicted. Mornings were still quiet, but they carried a different kind of quiet. Lila and Anne no longer lingered at the breakfast table just to draw alone. Sometimes she would sign a simple, "Good morning," to Liam, before darting off to wait for Emma's arrival. Emma never made her lessons feel like lessons. One day she brought a stack of thick paper and watercolor paints, spreading them out on the long kitchen island. "We're going to make a garden," she told Aria, signing each word deliberately. "Not with seeds, with colors." Aria tilted her head but picked up a brush, her small fingers steady as she began to paint looping vines and bursts of flowers. Emma worked beside her, not directing, just mirroring. Before long, Aria signed more colors and went digging through the paint box for blues and purples. Liam had meant to pass through on his way to the office, but something stopped him at the doorway. He watched as Emma leaned down to see Aria's picture more closely, smiling when Aria tapped the paper and signed "You" before painting another flower. "Wants me in her garden," Emma explained without looking up. It was a small sentence, but it caught in Liam's chest. The following week, Emma suggested they try something new. "It's called music visualization," she told him as they set up in the sunroom. "She can't hear the melody, but she can feel the rhythm." They laid a large wooden board on the floor, hooked to a low-frequency speaker. When the bass thumped gently, the wood vibrated. Aria stood barefoot on it, eyes wide, as Emma tapped her shoulder in time with the beat. "Ready?" Emma signed. Aria nodded, then began stepping side to side, feeling the vibration travel through her feet. Slowly, she began to move with the rhythm, her movements tentative at first, but then more sure. Liam, sitting nearby, found himself leaning forward, smiling without meaning to. He didn't join in immediately, but when Emma waved him over, he stood beside Aria, matching her movements. The three of them swayed together in the soft afternoon light, and for the first time in a long time, Liam felt something loosen inside him, a weight he hadn't realized he was still carrying. Later, in the kitchen, Aria picked up her signing cards and held up the one for family. She pointed to herself, then to Liam, then to Emma. Emma's eyes softened. "That's right," she said gently. It became a new pattern. Meals shared, with hands signing between bites. Afternoons in the garden, Emma and Aria kneeling in the soil to plant the early spring bulbs, while Liam, despite himself, fetched them water. Emma never treated the estate like an untouchable museum. She made space for living in it. One evening, the rain was coming down in steady sheets, drumming softly against the windows. They had finished a simple dinner, Lawson steamed vegetables, and Aria was sprawled on the couch with Emma, flipping through a picture book told entirely in sign. At one point, Emma signed something to Aria, who looked toward Liam with wide eyes. Slowly, carefully, Aria signed the words, "I love you." It was the first time she had ever done it. Liam froze. He'd heard those words from business associates, from acquaintances, from people who wanted something from him, but not from her. Not from the small, quiet girl who had kept her heart so guarded. His throat tightened as he walked over and crouched beside her. "I love you too," he signed back, his fingers a little unsteady. Aria smiled, a real, open smile, and leaned against him. When he looked at Emma, there was something in her eyes, not triumph, not pride, but understanding. She had known exactly what she was helping him receive. Later that night, after Aria was asleep, Liam passed by the study on his way to his room. The door was ajar, and the soft glow of the desk lamp spilled into the hall. Emma was inside, standing near the far wall with her phone pressed to her ear. He would have kept walking, but her voice, edged with tension, made him pause. "I got the letter from the law firm," she was saying. "No, I haven't decided yet. It's not that simple. You know why." There was a long silence, broken only by the faint hum of the rain outside. "I can't do this again," she said finally, her tone low and almost pleading. "Not like last time." Liam moved back before she could see him, retreating to the darker end of the hall. Something in his chest had shifted, even ease replacing the warmth from earlier. He didn't like unanswered questions, especially when they hovered anywhere near Aria. A letter from a law firm could mean anything. A dispute, a lawsuit, trouble she hadn't mentioned. And she hadn't mentioned it. In his world, trust wasn't given freely. Every alliance was vetted, every partnership investigated. He told himself it wasn't suspicion, it was due diligence. Still, the thought of digging into Emma's background felt heavier than it should have. The next morning, Emma arrived as usual, carrying a basket of art supplies for another project in the garden. Aria greeted her with a wave, bouncing on her toes. Liam watched from the terrace, the unease still twisting in his mind. He saw how easily Emma laughed with his daughter, how she knelt in the wet soil to help her replant a stubborn flower. And yet, he couldn't shake the sound of her voice on that call. That evening, after Emma left, Liam sat in his study, his laptop open but untouched. Finally, he picked up his phone and called an old contact in private security. "I need a background check," he said quietly. "Her name is Emma Lane. Start with any recent legal correspondence." As he ended the call, a tightness settled in his chest. He told himself it was the right move, that Aria's safety came before any sentiment. But somewhere, deeper, he knew it was also the return of an old habit. Building walls before someone could get close enough to tear them down. The rain had stopped. The garden was still damp, the new flowers Emma and Aria had planted standing upright in the moonlight. They looked fragile, yet somehow certain they would keep growing. Liam turned away from the window, convincing himself he was only doing what any good father would do, even if it meant risking the fragile trust they had begun to build. The background report arrived 3 days later. It was concise, professional, and full of the kind of details Liam had asked for. The kind of details that couldn't be found in casual conversation. He sat alone in his study, the late afternoon sun slanting across his desk as he read. Emma Lane, 26. Current address, a small apartment near the east edge of the city. Employment, volunteer work at the Community Communication Center, part-time art instructor. Then came the part that made him pause. Former residence, private estate in Crestwood Heights. Occupant status, engaged to one Daniel Wycliffe, investment executive. Relationship terminated 18 months ago. Reason for termination: Emma Lane reported concerns regarding potential financial fraud to federal authorities. Cooperating witness in an ongoing investigation. His eyes moved to the last section. The law firm representing the victims had recently requested her testimony in an upcoming court hearing. Liam leaned back in his chair, the files still in his hands. So she hadn't been lying when she said she understood commitment. But she had hidden all of this. Why? That night, when Emma arrived for Aria's evening session, Liam was waiting in the sitting room. Aria was upstairs in the playroom, working on a puzzle. "We need to talk," he said, his voice even but carrying a weight she didn't miss. Emma paused at the doorway, reading the tension in his posture. "All right, what is it?" He set the file on the table between them. "I had someone look into your background." Her brows lifted slightly, though her tone stayed calm. "Of course you did. You were engaged," he said, "to a man with more money than most small countries. And you left him after reporting him for fraud." "That's correct." "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was sharper now, the edge of mistrust bleeding through. "Why hide something like that, unless you had a reason to keep it from me? Or unless you thought it might make me wonder what you're doing here, around my daughter?" Emma's gaze didn't waver. "Liam, if you already have the facts, then you know I'm not the one under investigation. I left because I found out who he really was, and I wanted nothing to do with him. That's it." "That's not it," Liam pressed. "You walked away from a life of wealth just like that? People don't usually do that without wanting something else. You worked with kids at a community center, you lived modestly, but you could have had anything you wanted, so why walk away?" She hesitated, not because she didn't know the answer, but because she knew it wouldn't satisfy him if he'd already made up his mind. "Because I didn't want wealth built on lies. Because I watched people get hurt while he smiled for cameras. And because I learned that money without purpose is a cage." Liam's jaw tightened. "So what's your purpose here, with Aria?" "Purpose," Emma said slowly, "is to make her feel seen. To give her a place where she doesn't have to fight to be understood. That's all." But she could see it in his eyes. The wall was back, higher than before. "Patient secrets, he said finally. "Instead, I find out from an investigator. And forgive me, but I can't take that risk with her. She's been through too much already." Emma's hands were steady, but there was a faint tremor in her voice. "So you think I'm a risk? After everything we've done together for her? I think I can't afford to find out the hard way." For a moment, neither of them moved. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. Then Emma nodded once, almost to herself. "All right, I understand." She didn't argue. She didn't plead her case again. She simply walked upstairs to the playroom. Aria was sitting cross-legged on the floor, carefully fitting the last piece into her puzzle. She looked up as Emma entered, her face lighting instantly. Emma crossed the room and knelt beside her. "I have to go," she signed gently. Aria frowned, signing back, "Go where?" Emma hesitated. "I won't be coming back here. Not for lessons, not for the garden. But I will always remember you." The little girl's brows knitted. She signed quickly. "Why? Did I do something wrong?" Emma shook her head, her throat tightening. "No, you did everything right." Aria's eyes darted toward the door, toward where she knew her father was downstairs. Her hands stilled, then she turned back to the puzzle, dismantling it piece by piece without looking at Emma. "Aria?" Emma whispered, reaching out, but the girl's shoulders had gone rigid. When Emma finally left the room, Aria didn't follow. Downstairs, Liam stood in the foyer, his hands in his pockets. "I'll have my driver take you home," he said quietly. Emma met his gaze for a long moment. "She'll retreat again," she said. "You know that, right? You've just taught her that the moment she lets someone in, they leave." Liam's jaw flecked, but he didn't respond. The drive back to her apartment was silent. Emma stared out the window, the estate shrinking behind her, a silhouette against the fading light. She had known, when she agreed to work there, that the arrangement might not last forever, but she hadn't expected it to end like this. Not with Aria's face closing off again, not with the unfinished work still hanging between them. At the estate, the next few days felt different. Aria stopped using her signing cards. She no longer reached for her paints. At meal times, she sat quietly, eyes down, pushing food around her plate. Easy that all, of course, he told himself she just needed time to adjust, that Emma's absence was a temporary setback. But late at night, when the house was still, he remembered the look in Emma's eyes when she told him she would always remember Aria, and he wondered, not for the first time, whether he had made the right choice or simply the safe one. And whether, in protecting his daughter from being hurt, he had hurt her more deeply than anyone else ever could. It was early morning when Liam stepped into the art room. Dusty light from the high windows spilled across the long table where Aria usually worked. Her easel stood in the corner, brushes still in the jar, the water in the cup tinged faintly pink from their last session. He hadn't been in here since Emma left. The sight of the half-finished projects, the collages, the finger-painted flowers, hit him harder than he expected. They were echoes of laughter he hadn't realized he'd grown accustomed to. As he turned to leave, something caught his eye, a small, sealed envelope resting on the window ledge. The handwriting on the front was neat, looping, unmistakably Emma's. It read, "For my star." Frowning, he opened it carefully, as though it might tear if he breathed too hard. Inside was a series of thick sheets, each one hand-drawn in vibrant colors. The first picture was of the garden, the day they planted the purple lilies. Beneath it, in careful print, were the words, "Flowers grow best when you talk to them." Beside the text were matching words in sign language diagram. The second was of the kitchen table, Aria giggling with flour dusted on her nose. Caption, "The best recipes need laughter." Again, the words were doubled in sign. The third showed the old wooden swing in the yard, Aria's hair flying back, Emma pushing gently from behind. Caption, "Sometimes you just need someone to keep you moving." Page after page, memory after memory, all captured with warmth, each one paired with the language Emma had fought to make a bridge for Aria. By the last page, Liam's vision blurred. The final drawing was of Aria standing between them, holding both their hands. No caption this time, just the sign for family. He slid the drawings back into the envelope and sat heavily in one of the chairs. For the first time in days, he felt the full weight of what he had done. Later, over breakfast, he noticed Aria picking at her toast. She had been quiet before, but now there was a hollowness to her silence. Her plate remained barely touched. When he asked if she wanted to go out, she shook her head. That afternoon, she disappeared into the art room for hours. When he checked on her, she was seated on the floor with the envelope open, the drawings spread in a careful semicircle around her. She didn't look up when he entered. He crouched beside her. "Aria," he signed, "do you miss her?" Her eyes lifted to his, glassy but fierce, and she signed a single word, "Always." The admission lodged in his chest like a splinter. That evening, Mrs. Keene, the housekeeper who had been with the Hart family for over a decade, found him in the library. She hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Hart, I wasn't sure whether to tell you this, but I think you should know why she is the way she is with Aria." He looked up sharply. "Go on." His younger sister, Lila, was born deaf. Mrs. Keene said, "Their parents died in an accident when Emma was only 19. She became Lila's guardian overnight. She worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat, taught herself sign language so Lila wouldn't feel alone. That's why she connects with children like your daughter. She knows exactly what it feels like to be in their world." Liam's throat tightened. "She never told me?" Mrs. Keene's expression softened. "Some people don't tell their stories because they want pity. Others don't tell them because the pain isn't something they want to carry in every conversation. I think Emma's the latter." Her words sat with him long after she left. That night, alone in the dim quiet of his study, Liam picked up the envelope again. He traced the sign for family with his fingertip, the lines smudged faintly from handling. For the first time since she walked out, he admitted it to himself. He had been wrong. The decision to find her came quickly, but carrying it out was harder than he expected. He had no idea where she might be working now. She had cut ties cleanly, left without so much as a forwarding address. By the third day of searching, his assistant, Mark, returned with a lead. She's been running a small art workshop downtown, mostly kids from the community center, Saturday mornings. It was Friday night when Liam decided he wasn't going to wait. He wanted to see her in her own space, on her terms. The next morning, he drove himself, no driver, no entourage, to the converted warehouse that now served as the workshop. From outside, he could hear the low hum of conversation, bursts of laughter, the rhythmic scratch of brushes against canvas. When he stepped inside, the smell of acrylic paint and paper hit him. The walls were lined with bright, uneven masterpieces. At the far end of the room, Emma stood beside a long table, demonstrating a technique to a group of children. Her hair was tied back loosely, a streak of pale blue paint marking the edge of her sleeve. She didn't notice him at first. She was too focused on a boy struggling to mix colors, leaning down to sign slowly until his face broke into a grin. It was the same patient warmth he had seen with Aria, and the sight of it stirred something raw in him. When she finally straightened and caught sight of him, the change was immediate. Her hands stilled, the easy smile fading into something guarded. She murmured something to one of the volunteers, who stepped in to take over, before walking toward him. "Mr. Hart," she said evenly, "I wasn't expecting to see you here." "I needed to talk to you," he replied. She glanced toward the children. "This isn't really the place." "Wait," he said simply. For the next half hour, he stood off to the side, watching her move through the class. It was a small thing, but he noticed how she knelt to each child's level, how she signed to those who needed it without drawing attention, how she let them lead their own work instead of correcting every mistake. When the last child left, Emma began cleaning the brushes, methodically placing them in jars. "What do you want, Liam?" she asked, without looking at him. He stepped closer, his voice low. "I found the envelope you left for Aria." Her hands froze for a fraction of a second before continuing. "I didn't think you'd see it." "Trousers," he said. "She looks at those drawings for hours. She stopped eating properly, she barely paints anymore. Emma, I thought keeping her safe meant controlling who came into her life. I didn't realize I was taking something from her that mattered more than I understood." Emma set the brushes down and turned to face him fully. "You made it very clear you didn't trust me." "Wrong," he said simply. "I let my fear make the decision for me. Mrs. Keene told me about your sister, about everything you've done. I should have listened to who you are, not who I assumed you might be." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Emma sighed, shaking her head slightly. "I didn't leave because I couldn't handle it, Liam. I left because you decided, without giving me a chance, that I was a risk. I couldn't stay where I wasn't trusted, not when Aria would feel that too." He took a step closer. "I'm asking you to come back, not for me, for her. She misses you, and I think I do too." Her gaze softened, but there was hesitation there. "If I came back, it would have to be different. No investigations, no second guessing at that." Thorin looked hurt and bereft at the interruption. Her gaze softened, through that again. Liam nodded. "I promise, no more walls." Emma studied him for a long moment, then gave a small, almost reluctant smile. "We'll see if you mean that." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either, and for the first time in weeks, Liam felt something that almost resembled hope. The following afternoon, Liam found himself back at the workshop. This time there was no crowd of children, no paint-splattered chaos, just Emma, stacking canvases near the back wall. The air smelled faintly of turpentine and fresh coffee. She looked up as he entered, cautious but not cold. Froda said, "I didn't think I'd see you so soon," she said. "I didn't want to wait," Liam replied. He took a slow step toward her, searching for the right words. "I owe you more than an apology. I owe you trust, and I need you back in Aria's life." Her expression wavered. "Liam, she's been through enough. You can't keep letting people in only to push them away when you get scared. That kind of instability," she trailed off, shaking her head. "You know," he said quietly. "That's why I'm here, not to make excuses. I'm telling you that I was wrong, completely wrong. I was trying to protect her, but I ended up hurting her, and you in the process." Emma crossed her arms loosely, as though holding herself together. "And what happens when your doubts creep back in? What happens when you start thinking you made a mistake by letting me close again? To you. Because this time, I'm choosing to be open. To you. No more digging, no more second-guessing. I want to know you for who you are, not who I imagined you might be." She studied him for a long moment, eyes searching his face for cracks in the sincerity. "If I agree, it has to be different. For Aria's sake and for mine. No walls between us. If there's a problem, we talk about it." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. The corner of her mouth lifted, not quite a smile, but something close. "All right, Mr. Hart, let's see if you can keep your promise." When they pulled up to the estate later that afternoon, Aria was in the front garden with Mrs. Keene, sitting cross-legged on the grass. The moment she spotted Emma, she froze, as if afraid the image would dissolve if she blinked. Then, without warning, she bolted forward. Emma dropped to her knees just in time to catch the small body flinging into her arms. Aria's hands moved so fast they were almost a blur. "I missed you, I missed you, I missed you." Emma's arms tightened around her. "I missed you too, Star." Helen stood a few steps away, the lump in his throat making it hard to swallow. He had seen his daughter smile before, but this light, this fierce joy, was something else entirely. Back inside, they settled in the art room. Emma unpacked a new set of colorful signing cards, each with bold pictures and words in both English and illustrated sign. Aria dove into the game eagerly, glancing now and then at her father, as if making sure he was paying attention. Liam sat down beside them. "Can I join?" Emma's brows rose in pleasant surprise. Of course. For the next hour, they played together, matching signs to pictures, turning it into a kind of charades that had Aria giggling when Liam fumbled. Emma's patience was endless, gently correcting his hand shapes, repeating each sign until he got it right. When Aria successfully signed a full sentence without prompting, Emma clapped in celebration. Liam caught her eye in that moment, a look of shared pride passing between them. It lingered just a beat too long, and he found himself looking away. Later, as the sun dipped low and the golden light spilled through the tall windows, Aria carried her new cards upstairs, humming softly. Liam stayed behind in the art room, watching Emma tidy up the table. "Thank you," he said finally. She glanced over. "For what?" "For coming back. For doing this. For her." Her gaze softened. "I'm here because of her. But also, maybe a little because of you. Just don't make me regret it." The words warmed him more than he expected. Over the next week, the estate felt different. Lighter. Emma's presence seemed to ripple through every corner. The kitchen was filled with Aria's laughter again, the garden saw new flowers planted, and the art room came alive with color. Liam found himself drawn into their routines. Mornings began with breakfast together, where Emma would sign along to whatever Aria wanted to say. Afternoons sometimes meant lessons outside, with the breeze flipping the pages of their books. And in the evenings, Liam often stayed to watch the quiet moments. Emma brushing a smudge of paint from Aria's cheek, or Aria curling up beside her on the couch with a sketch pad. One Thursday afternoon, Emma decided to test Aria with a new challenge. "We're going to try a full sentence, Star," she signed, with an encouraging smile. "Something you want to tell your dad." Aria glanced at Liam, her eyes bright with mischief. Slowly, carefully, her fingers formed the signs. "You need more practice." Liam laughed, a real, unstrained laugh that made Aria grin. "She's not wrong," Emma teased. The three of them practiced until Aria got every movement right, her small hands moving with precision. When she finally nailed the sentence she had been struggling with earlier, "I love the garden." Liam's chest swelled with pride. He caught Emma's eye again, and this time, neither of them looked away quickly. That night, after Aria had gone to bed, Liam found Emma in the kitchen, rinsing brushes at the sink. The warm light above the counter cast a soft glow over her face. "Emma," he began, leaning lightly against the doorway, I don't think I've told you how much I appreciate what you've done. Not just for Aria, but for me too." She looked over her shoulder. "For you?" he said, stepping closer. "I haven't felt connected to someone like this in years. Not since before Aria was born. I thought I was fine living behind my walls, keeping my world small, but you've reminded me what it's like to actually let someone in." Her hands stilled in the water. "Liam, this isn't just about Aria anymore," he said quietly. "I care about her more than anything in the world, but somewhere along the way, I started caring about you too." For a moment, the only sound was the water running in the sink. Emma turned slowly to face him, her expression caught between surprise and something warmer. "You don't have to say anything," he added quickly. "I just needed you to know, because if I'm asking you to be open with me, I have to be open with you too." Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "You're right, you do." She reached for a towel, drying her hands slowly. "And I'll think about what you said." It wasn't rejection, but it wasn't a declaration either. Still, it was enough to send a flicker of hope through him. As she moved past him toward the stairs, her arm brushed his, just enough to leave a lingering heat in its wake. And for the first time in a long time, Liam let himself believe that maybe the walls he had built were finally beginning to come down. The city woke to a ribbon of blue sky and the kind of bright autumn light that makes glass look like water. On the corner of Maple and Fifth, a new building caught that light and held it, all clean lines and generous windows, the facade traced with a mural of hands spelling welcome in bold, joyful strokes. Above the doors, the letters read, Aria Center, Sign Language and Art Therapy. The name made people pause and smile before they even stepped inside. Liam stood on the sidewalk, straightening his tie as the crowd gathered. Reporters angled for the best shot. Donors chattered under fluttering banners, and neighborhood families came with strollers and scooters, drawn by curiosity and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifting from a food truck. He should have been thinking about the program's schedule. Instead, he kept glancing toward the car idling at the curb. The rear door opened, and Aria stepped out in a navy dress with tiny silver stars stitched along the hem. She wore her hair half up, a small barrette catching the sun, and on her wrist a bracelet of smooth wooden beads Emma had strung with her the night before. Emma followed, carrying a slim, wrapped package and a folder tucked under her arm, the two of them moving with the practiced ease of a pair who had learned each other's rhythm in 100 small rooms. When Aria saw the sign above the entrance, she pressed her palms to her chest and exhaled a breath that looked like relief and wonder combined. Liam had kept the name a secret until this morning. He had wanted to see this exact experience. He crouched as she reached him, and she touched his cheek with her fingertips, then signed slowly, carefully, the way she always did when she needed him to feel each word. "Thank you for my name on the house," he answered with hands he had trained every evening for a year. "It was always yours." Emma's smile reached her eyes, soft as the first page of a favorite book. "They're waiting for you inside," she said, "and your daughter has a speech to give." Aria's eyes widened. The good kind of nerves. She had practiced in front of the living room window, in the garden next to the rosemary bush, in the quiet of the new center's rehearsal room, her small fingers learning to keep pace with a heart that sometimes raced ahead. Today she would stand on a stage and sign to strangers, trusting the world to meet her where she was. Inside, the lobby breathed light. Installations hung like branches from the high ceiling, each piece made by a different cohort of children. Ceramic tiles impressed with palms, a mobile of paper birds stamped with words like brave, curious, home. Volunteers guided guests toward the auditorium, while an interpreter team checked sight lines and camera frames. Every detail had been designed to say, "This place sees you." Backstage, Aria stood between Liam and Emma, the three of them looking out through the wing at rows of faces. The mayor sat near the front with the school superintendent. The community center's director dabbed at her eyes with a tissue she kept pretending she didn't need. The Ariam of conversation faded when the lights lowered and the MC stepped to the lectern. "Welcome," she said, signing as she spoke. "Today we open a place built not only with funds and concrete, but with listening." She introduced the mission, the partnerships, the programming, early intervention, family workshops, creative expression studios, a scholarship fund named for a teacher who had spent 4 decades making sure no child was left to sit at the edge of a conversation. Then she turned toward the wing. And now, our first speaker, the person who inspired the name on the door. Aria's hand found Emma's. Emma squeezed. Once, Liam knelt to meet his daughter's eyes. "You have this," he signed. "I am here." She stepped into the light. For a second, she stood very still, breathing in the quiet. The interpreter waited at stage left, ready to voice for the hearing audience, but the room felt as if every ear had become an eye. Aria lifted her hands, and the story began. "Hello, my name is Aria. When I was small, I thought silence meant alone. But then, I learned silence is also a room where pictures live. I learned hands can sing. I learned the world will listen if I speak the way my voice knows how." She paused to look toward the front row where a cluster of children sat with their parents. A little boy with cochlear implants leaned forward, mirroring her signs as if learning a dance. Aria smiled and continued. "This place is for kids who talk with sound, kids who talk with pictures, and kids who are still learning how to talk at all. It is for families who need a bench to sit on while they figure it out. It is for teachers who say, 'Show me your language, and I will meet you there.'" Her fingers had grown steadier with each phrase. Liam felt the old ache swell in his chest, the one that came from watching her keep choosing courage. Emma did not take her eyes off Aria, not even for a heartbeat. Aria ended the way she had practiced, but in her own cadence. "Thank you for building a place that tells the truth. I am not broken. I am a voice." She bowed, small and sure, and the room rose to its feet. The kind of applause that carries gratitude instead of noise washed up to the rafters. The interpreter's eyes shone. The MC returned to the stage with a hand pressed to her heart. Liam's palms stung from clapping. When Aria reached the wing, he scooped her up and held her, not as a rescue but as a celebration. "You did it," he signed against her back. She pulled away, enough to sign that we did. The program continued. Brief remarks from partners, a ribbon cut in a shower of biodegradable confetti, a tour that led guests past therapy rooms painted in colors chosen for calm. In one studio, low tables held trays of kinetic sand. In another, a wall of drums waited to turn rhythm into touch for kids who needed sound they could feel. A courtyard opened to a small garden where raised beds were labeled with both words and signs. Emma had insisted on that last one. During the reception, reporters found Liam for a statement. He spoke about access and design and long-term goals, but when a microphone caught him off guard with a question about why he had named the center after his daughter, his answer came from a place he would have avoided a year ago. "Because she taught me not to mistake quiet for absence," he said. "Because she taught me to listen with more than my ears." Emma stood a few feet away, listening. When their eyes met, something like sunlight passed between them. Aria tugged at Emma's sleeve then and pointed toward a corner display, 3 canvases on easels covered with cloth. Emma nodded to the volunteer stationed there, and the two of them beckoned Liam over. "We have something to show you," Emma said. The cloth lifted to reveal a triptych. On the left, a painting of the cafe where it had all begun, a small table by a window, a blue crayon on the floor, a young woman kneeling to return it. In the center, a garden scene, hands pushing bulbs into soil, the dirt under nails a badge of belonging. On the right, a stage with a child standing in light, her hands mid-sentence, the silhouettes of 2 adults at the wing, steady as... Liam reached out but did not touch, as if contact might smudge the edges of memory. "You made these?" "Together," Emma said. "Over months, she chose every color." Aria leaned her head against Emma's arm, an old habit returned with new meaning. Liam swallowed and nodded once, hard, because words felt both too small and too loud. Tours concluded, guests drifted into the courtyard, and the afternoon loosened from schedule into celebration. Children discovered the joy of drums humming through the soles of their feet. A volunteer taught grandparents how to sign the names of every grandchild they claimed in the room. The food truck began, handing out more cinnamon rolls than seemed mathematically possible. Somewhere in the midst of it, the mayor learned the sign for thank you and used it awkwardly but often. Near the end of the hour, Emma glanced at the slim, wrapped package she had carried in, still tucked behind the reception table. "Now?" she asked Aria. "Now," Aria signed, the movement certain. They led Liam into a quieter alcove near a wall of donor tiles. Children's handprints marched between the names, like commas in a sentence that would never be finished. Emma placed the package in Aria's hands. The girl turned to Liam and offered it up with a small, ceremonial seriousness that made him smile before he even knew what it was. He unwrapped it carefully. Inside the paper lay a frame of dark wood, simple and warm, the kind that feels like a palm held out. The photograph inside had been printed on thick, matte stock. He recognized the moment immediately. The three of them in the garden a few months after Emma returned, Aria between them, all three laughing at something the camera hadn't captured. The light had been late afternoon kind, generous and forgiving. His own face looked different in it. Not younger exactly, but unarmored. Beneath the photo, a small brass plaque had been engraved with 4 words: "My family, my voice." Liam did not try to blink away the sting in his eyes. He let it be seen. He reached for Aria first, lifting her with an ease born of years, then for Emma, drawing her in with his free hand. Aria wrapped her arms around both of them, the frame pressed between their chests like a promise. On the other side of the alcove, a photographer lowered his camera without taking the shot. Some things are kept. Emma's cheek rested against Liam's shoulder, a heartbeat longer than polite. When she stepped back, he kept her hand. He didn't make a speech. He didn't need to. His thumb traced the inside of her wrist once, a touch that asked and answered without words. They returned to the courtyard together, a unit that had been assembled slowly, honestly, with more patience than either adult would have believed they possessed when they first reenacted a miracle in a cafe. People parted for them without meaning to. That is how gravity works when people begin to orbit one another for real. Later, when the building had exhaled the last guests and staff had stacked chairs with the good tired that follows right work, they walked the halls again, just the three of them. Aria pressed every room's light switch on and off once, a ritual she invented to say, "See you tomorrow." In the studio, with the drums, Emma stepped onto the low-frequency platform and laughed when the vibration tickled up through her shoes. Aria put Liam's hand on the surface so he could feel it too, then signed, "This is how right." He tried the sign for music, a curve of wrist and palm he still sometimes overdid. Emma corrected him gently, then let his hand stay in hers longer than the lesson required. They ended in the garden, where the new beds waited for spring. The sky had softened toward evening, a faint pink smudged over the skyline. Aria crouched to check the tiny winter pansies by the walkway, brushing a leaf with the seriousness of a scientist. Emma tucked her hair behind her ear and looked at Liam as if measuring how far he had come. "But you remember?" he asked. "The first day in the cafe? The crayon?" "Remember, you looked like a man trying very hard not to want anything," she said. "You looked like a person who knew exactly what to do with a dropped blue crayon," he replied, smiling. "I think that's when my life started over." Aria stood and placed one of Emma's hands in one of Liam's without ceremony, then slid her own hand between theirs, satisfaction written clear as ink across her face. "Family," she signed with her free fingers. Then, slower so they would savor it, "We chose." They stood like that until the chill nudged them back inside. It would not be their last quiet evening in this place. It would be the first of many that felt like arriving. They walked back inside together, carrying the frame and the day like something gentle and sure. The future waited. Patiently. That evening, when the last guests drifted out and the lights softened, the three of them stood beneath the mural in the lobby. Without the crowd, the building felt calm and certain, like a book that had finally found its title. Aria asked for one more walk. Liam nodded. Emma dimmed the halls to small pools of light. They moved slowly, pausing in the family lounge where picture books waited on low shelves and a lending cart held board games labeled in both words and sign. Aria chose a fox story and tucked it under her arm as if it had quietly asked to come home. In the therapy kitchen, Emma smiled. "Tomorrow, there will be flour," she said. Aria signed, and laughter. They stepped into the rhythm studio and stood together on the low platform. The floor pulsed with a slow beat. Aria placed their hands against it, first Emma's, then Liam's, watching their faces as the vibration climbed through skin. Emma signed, "Music is everywhere." Aria answered, "We can feel it." Liam formed the sign for music, and Emma corrected his wrist with a touch that lingered. They saved the auditorium for last. The seats sat like dark waves, the stage a quiet shore. Aria climbed 3 steps and bowed with exaggerated grandeur, then signed. "Did I do okay?" Emma replied. "You were brave," Leah added. "You were brilliant." Aria stood taller at the combination. Back outside, the courtyard held the day's warmth. Dorner tiles gleamed along a wall. "Maintenance," Liam said gently, tightening a loose screw on one nameplate. "Holding things together is part of loving them." Emma looked at him as if that sentence could be framed. They drove home with the windows cracked. Aria signed fragments from the day, the mayor's clumsy thank you, the cinnamon rolls, a little boy who mirrored her signs from the front row, and Emma embroidered the stories when Aria wanted more words. Liam, hands on the wheel, listened to the way he had learned to, with attention instead of answers. At the house, Mrs. Keene had left a plate of sandwiches and a note that read, "For champions." Aria ate with new appetite, then stood in the doorway of the art room and looked at the easel. "Tomorrow," she signed. Emma tapped the frame and answered, "Tomorrow." When Aria slept, Fox book under her pillow, Liam and Emma carried mugs to the back porch. The framed photograph lay between them on the table, the brass plaque catching a thread of porch light. "She was brave," Emma said. "Every day," Liam replied, "but today, the world noticed." Somewhere the sprinklers... "I kept my promise," he said after a while. "No more walls." Emma considered him not with romance, but with inventory, measuring choices against declarations. "You did," she answered. "So here is mine. I will tell you the truth when fear tries to borrow your voice." He smiled at that, reached across the table with his palm up and waited. She placed her hand in his. The moment felt permanent. Months passed. The center found its rhythm. Families came anxious and left with plans. Aria made friends who could sprint through a conversation and sign, and also learned to slow down for children just beginning. Liam joined a parent circle and discovered that listening could be leadership. Emma split her hours between classrooms and the courtyard, where raised beds wore labels and letters and hand shapes. Mint, thyme, hope. On cold days, the riffin floor stayed warm. On warm days, chalk-covered sidewalk. The triptych they had painted moved to a wall outside the auditorium and became an unofficial tour. A cafe, a garden, a stage. People lingered there. One afternoon in late spring, Liam found Aria teaching a younger boy the sign for brave. She showed him, waited, and then celebrated when he tried again and got it right. Liam stood in the doorway and realized he was watching his daughter become the kind of person who once rescued him. Emma joined him and leaned into his shoulder. "You see it?" she whispered. By summer, a small grant launched a mobile team to reach families who couldn't travel. In autumn, the courtyard smelled of thyme. In winter, paper snowflakes hung from the lobby ceiling with wishes signed in their centers. Courage, friends, time. Their home learned its own rituals. Tuesday soups, Thursday games, and Saturdays at the market where Aria negotiated for peaches. As the first anniversary approached, Aria declared a rehearsal. She set 3 chairs in a row and handed out note cards. "Speeches," she signed, very official. Emma thanked the kids, who invented new signs when old ones weren't enough. Liam talked about mistakes that had turned into doors. Aria talked about a fox who learned to dance by watching leaves. They applauded. The anniversary day was small, by design. Staff baked pies, the interpreter team ran a trivia game, a volunteer played rhythm on the drum board so everyone could feel it. Aria took the stage again, taller by an inch and steadier by a mile. She signed a welcome, then a thank you for patience, the sign careful and new. Emma let herself cry openly. "I used to think centers like this were extras. Now I think the road..." Liam shook his hand and didn't try to hide what that did to him. After the crowd thinned, Emma returned with another frame. Inside was a collage of small moments. Aria laughing, mid-swing, a cluster of children with paint up their arms like bright sleeves, Liam cross-legged on the floor while a boy taught him a sign, Emma asleep in a beanbag while 3 tiny conspirators drew mustaches on the photo's edge. "For your office," she said. He set it on a shelf. Dusk found them under the mural. Aria lifted the fox book toward the painted hands as if to toast. "To the leaves," Emma translated, amused. Aria nodded. "Some references don't need explaining." Outside, streetlights came on. Liam took Emma's hand, the way he did now. At thanks, Aria slid between them and swung their arms once, calibrating the pendulum toward home. At the corner, a violinist drew a thin, bright line of melody through the air. Aria touched the metal bench with her palm and closed her eyes until the note climbed into her hand. "See," she sighed, "music is everywhere." Liam looked at Emma. She answered it with a nod. Back at the house, they placed the first-day photograph on the hallway table, where morning light would find it, beside a dish for keys and a ceramic bowl that treasures children insist are priceless. Aria added the wooden bead bracelet Emma had helped her make the week everything began. "For luck," she signed. Emma corrected her to the sign for blessing. Aria kept. They turned out lights one by one. In Aria's doorway, Liam paused. She reached for his sleeve, tugged him closer, and pointed to the hand-painted sign above her bed that simply read, "Home." He kissed her forehead. Emma waited on the porch, where the night smelled faintly of rosemary. They stood shoulder to shoulder. "You used to fill silence with plans," she said. "I let it say what it says," he answered, "which is, we are not alone." She took his hand. Inside, the house kept their laughter. Outside, the city turned a page. And on Maple and Fifth, the Aria Center held its light like water and its doors like arms. Tomorrow there would be new families, new games, new ways to say yes to each other. Tonight, there was a frame catching a thread of moon on its glass, and 3 people who had chosen each other on purpose, exactly as the plaque beneath the photo promised. "My family, my voice, together."